Welcome to the Retail is Detail podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Hamer. This is where we go beyond the headlines and get into how great retailers and tech innovators really think, from trading to teams to business building to tech, loyalty, and data. Every Monday afternoon, I talk to the people building, running, and reinventing retail, unpacking what's working, what's changing, and what's next. If you care about the detail of retail, you're in the right place. Today, we'll be talking about the engine room of modern retail, customer retention. My guest is Ethan Burnett, Senior Email Strategist at SalesFire, where he helps brands turn customer data into loyalty and lifetime value. Ethan, most retailers say they personalize, but most emails still look the same. Why is it so hard to actually deliver on personalization?
I think personalization at its core is powered by good data, and brands tend to silo their data, or they tend to not necessarily collect the right data at the right time. Or if they do hold this data, they don't necessarily know if they realize what they hold. And then by doing so, don't then leverage that through their campaigns. And as many of your listeners will know, personalization through emails as well as other channels is a massive, massive driver of engagement. It's a massive driver of interaction, and ultimately it drives sales. And it really is what adds a human touch to the campaigns and makes them warm. And it stops the interpretation of marketing emails and marketing campaigns being cold, and kind of puts a little bit of a personalized view behind it. So the big blocker for that, I think, is the lack of access to data or an misunderstanding of how best to use it.
And how are you helping retailers better clean and access their data?
So at SalesFire, we've got a couple of ways that we do this. The first thing that we do is through first-party data. So that's when a customer comes onto your site. Traditionally, brands will use things like pop-ups, or they'll collect email addresses, which is a great way to get data. Where SalesFire really kind of stands out in that space is that instead of just serving a single pop-up to every new customer, we use machine learning algorithms and models to look at different customer behaviors, identify customers based on what they're looking at, when they've looked at, are they a returning customer or are they a new customer? And using this, you can then tailor the content that you actually serve to these customers when you collect their data. This means that instead of just being served a pop-up and immediately clicking off it, you get served something that's a little bit more relevant and a little bit more tailored to what you're looking at. This might be based on interest. So if you've gone and looked at a specific product or a specific brand on a retailer's website, when that data is collected, that retailer then will know what you're interested in and what products you've been looking at, which will then serve to personalize a little bit more. The other area that SalesFire really excels in, and this is kind of our USP almost, is the anonymous data collection side of things. So about 90 to 95% of all visitors on a site come on anonymously, and you'll generally never know who they are. So you don't get email addresses, you don't have any information about SMS or any way to contact them. And what SalesFire does is we use an identity meshing technology where we can go and we can look at anonymous users using a number of identifiers, and we build thousands and thousands and thousands of anonymous profiles. And then when we recognize that these anonymous profiles are actually linked to an existing person, the existing customer, we'll link all that historic data back that would have been usually would have been anonymized and lost. And then this really massively enriches that customer profile for all these sessions that aren't tracked, be it because they're on a different device, they're on a different IP, they've got incognito, they've potentially even used a different email address. Things like that can all still be meshed back to that original user profile.
And so in terms of finding and matching that data, I mean, that sounds like a heroic task. Is that possible in the majority of cases?
Yeah, pretty much any retailer so we've got 5,000 clients across our suite currently. Now we have clients who are really, really high average order value clients, and things like furniture, who get a lower number of visitors and who traditionally may actually struggle to try and get that data, because although they have the volume in terms of the actual order values, they don't have the volume in terms of customers. All the way through to the flip side, where we have customers who sell items that maybe £2 or £3 an item, who have really, really high volumes. Anyone within that sort of space can benefit from it. All you've got to be able to have is historical records of people coming onto the site, which as retailers we should hopefully all have.
Very cool. What's the one day deadly automation that your rivals are overlooking and that's become your secret weapon at SalesFire?
I think the most important one is a post-purchase flow. Now, everyone always likes to look and get the first conversion through, and they always try and get such a focus on, you've got PPC strategies, SEO strategies, getting new people on site and getting that first order through. But as a rule of thumb, that's going to be the most expensive order you ever get from a customer. The post-purchase flow to me is always the most important one. And I always say the second order is more important than the third, because if a customer comes back and places a second order, they'll like to place a third, fourth, fifth, and become a really, really loyal customer. So once you've broke down the barriers to getting that first order through and someone put that trust in you, the key is to then build and nurture a relationship as they go through, and to make sure that they can see you as a reputable seller and someone that they'd like to come back to and shop with again, because then you don't need to pay to acquire them time and time again.
Upselling your current customers always easier than finding
Absolutely.
new ones. Walk me through the worst campaign you've ever sent, whether it's in a previous life, at Printed or I Love Wallpaper, or now at Salesfire. What
I
did you learn about retail and human behavior through failure?
I think, and this is quite a common mistake, and a lot of brands actually try and replicate this as a non-mistake. But
Hmm.
I've on occasion I've sent out blank emails with no content in there, and you then have to follow it up with a "Oops, we sent the wrong email." And a lot of brands do this to try and get your attention anyway. And I promise it. Well, when I've done it, it actually was a genuine mistake. And I think I sent an email to 250,000 people on a database, and it was blank. But I realized that actually, we're all human, we're all guided by emotion. And when you see something and you're not quite sure what it is, or you're like, oh, someone's made a mistake, the curiosity gets the better of you and you'll go in and you'll engage with it. And this campaign happens to be the best engaging campaign I think I've ever sent. The open
Right.
rates were fantastic, and it was a mistake and it didn't make us look very good, but it actually kind of taught you a little bit about how like the emotion of a buyer or emotion of someone who interacts is that curiosity got the better of them and they went in and had a look, which is why I think brands try and replicate it and make it off as a mistake when it's not.
So is that a strategy you now recommend?
I can't recommend it, but I've seen it done quite well.
Right. And if every marketer had to delete in retail, had to delete one automation forever, which one would you choose to erase?
I'm going to be a bit controversial with this one. I would probably get rid of a welcome flow. And now that sounds really out there because welcome flows on paper drive tons of money. But actually, the vast majority of customers who are going to come through to your site are likely going to convert anyways.
Hmm.
And they are possibly just signing up for emails to look to try and get a discount code. So I would probably get rid of a welcome flow, focus more of your energies on kind of on-site conversion, making sure the site is optimized for customers. Follow up with browser band, and you can follow up with basket band, and you can target them based on the specific interest of wherever they've landed on your site. But a generic welcome flow, in my opinion, sometimes isn't the best way to engage these customers. You want to
Hmm.
talk about what they're interested in or where they've been on your site, which is where browse and basket comes into it a little bit better.
Okay, so you're better off getting some data and then using it rather than having something generic as the initial thing that people see.
In most situations, yes. Sometimes there's instances where someone may have come on and they want a discount code, or there's like a free download and things like that. And that's kind of where that would be better suited. But as a general rule of thumb, I think anything that you can attach data to and append data to, like if you can personalize a welcome flow with the content that a customer's been looking at, then great. But you should always lean more towards the data that you know about a customer than just a generic one size fits all approach.
Okay. Awesome. True personalization. In your life cycle marketing 101 framework, Salesforce, which stage of the customer journey drives the most revenue but never gets the credit it deserves for retailers?
I think the brand advocate stage, the returning customer stage, the kind of stage where someone comes in and is placing multiple orders with you, doesn't necessarily get the love and attention that it should. A lot of
Mm.
time and resource goes into kind of very early life conversion. A lot of time and a huge amount of resource goes into the acquisition of new customers, which is
Hmm.
very important, but not as much time and resource goes into actually retaining and keeping loyal customers. And I think that's where a lot of brands slip up, whereas they don't actually look to nurture these customers through from 2 or 3 orders to 4, 5, 6 or 7 orders. They don't turn them into sort of lifetime advocates for the brand. They just sort of sit after 1 or 2 orders and that's it. So I think that's the area that I think brands neglect most.
And who or how have you seen this done really well, that retention and 2 to 6 purchase piece?
I think that one of the best brands that I personally shop from, and they don't have a loyalty scheme and they don't have discounts or incentives or anything like that majorly, is actually ASOS. Now they're a very big brand and a lot of people use them examples, but ASOS's shopping experience is so seamless for me. So when I go on and look at products, they know what I've bought and looked at before, so that whenever I go on, immediately it's a seamless experience. They've got recommendations in there. They know what if I'm looking for male products, they'll serve me male products. They'll serve me certain styles. They have a little recommended line of products that they think I'll like. They have a great shipping network where you just pay for shipping once and that's it done. And it's such a
Mm.
seamless experience that now whenever I think oh, I might need a new pair of shoes or I might need a new jumper, the first thought is just to go to ASOS because I know when I'm going to get the product, I know that they're going to serve me something I'm interested in. I don't have to spend hours and hours and hours trawling through the site to try and find something. It's such a unique, personalized experience. I'm going to go on there and within 10 minutes find what I need. So I think they do it very well. And they don't really have a loyalty scheme. They don't throw loads and loads of money at trying to discount you, anything like that. It's just really seamless experiences when you go on.
Mm. And what's your philosophy on using first-party data to personalization without crossing the line and eroding trust?
I think that I agree that there is definitely an element of trust in it, and sometimes you can scare customers away if you try and personalize too much. I think as long as you can prove that whatever it is you're personalizing adds value, that's that's the line you should always ride on. I think that if you're talking to customers about things that they're interested in, you're using personalization, very basic things like first names, last names, you're showing them loyalty status, you're tweaking campaigns based on whatever they've looked at. As long as there's a value add to there, the customer generally, as a rule of thumb, shouldn't look at that and think that's a bit intrusive or I'm not happy with that, because they should be too happy with whatever it is you gave them content wise.
Okay. So you got to make it so that they appreciate the personalization rather than
Yes.
even
I think
necessarily recognizing it.
the best personalization is that personalization that's not recognized. It's where it's so seamless and it's so unique to that customer that they're so engaged that they won't even realize that they're actually seeing personalized content and being targeted in that way, because they gloss it because they're that happy with what you're serving them. So I think that's the best approach with that.
In terms of your product suite for personalization, what are the key tools you'd recommend?
So our product suite is focused on two areas when it comes to personalization mainly. So the first one is recommended products. Now, these look at various strategies. So we have a new in recommendation strategy that looks at the newest products and serves them to customers. We have a personalized strategy that looks at what the products the customer has looked at previously. So this will look at categories and product level information, and then it'll look at lookalike products for that audience and serve it to you. We also have a search functionality. Now, the reason our search functionality exists is because at sales side, we realized we were holding all this data about customers. We knew what they were looking for. We knew they were interested in. But when they were going to actually use their generic search functionality on the website, they weren't getting served anything that was relevant to them. And they still had to go through the process of typing in different phrases, scrolling through the site. So what we do is we leverage that recommendation data into the search itself. So when someone loads up a search on the site, the key products they are interested in are already in there. When they're actually searching for things, we can weight the algorithm to show them products that are still relevant to things they've looked at or bought in the past. So it just really reduces the amount of time, the amount of touch points a customer needs to actually make that purchase.
With cookie death looming, are retailers truly ready for a world with zero-party data, or are they just pretending?
I think that some retailers are very, very switched on for it, and some retailers have done a lot of preparation for it. And I think that some are hoping that someone will come up with a solution that helps them retain their data and are sort of just holding out for it. We speak to some retailers who are very, very concerned about it. The good thing about Salesforce's platform and our tracking platform is that although cookies are a part of what we track, we've got many, many, many identifiers that don't necessarily rely on cookies. Server-side tracking, as an example, is a great way to retain customer data for periods that are longer than current cookie thresholds and in more detail and in more depth. I think some retailers aren't prepared for that. And I think that there is an opportunity for companies like ourselves that do offer this level of tracking that will be able to address the needs of those companies and so what their tracking needs are. It just obviously doesn't help that big tech isn't super informative about what the next steps are. Google's floated this API tracking and things like that, and Apple have kind of just sort of started sunsetting all the tracking that we can do anyways and not really given as much of a solution around that. But for companies like ourselves who are sort of helping with that solution, I think it's a great opportunity for us. And I think companies that need to leverage that tech should probably start making those preparations sooner rather than later.
So everyone's going to have less data, but Salesforce can have some.
Yeah, exactly that. So everyone's going to have less data. Cookies are what everyone's been relying on for many, many years. And unfortunately, once they go, there are going to be elements of tracking that are either not as accurate or just don't exist. But people can get clever with what they track. People can get clever with how they track. They can use technology providers to do that. And they really just need to rely more on gathering that first party data through things like data overlays and collections, and making sure that as many touch points where they can gather data, they're doing so. So just to enrich their stockpiles of customer information further down the line.
What's the most overrated metric in retail marketing right now, and which metric deserves more attention?
So with my background in email, I'm going to be biased towards metrics in relation to that. Open rates are the most overrated statistic in email, in retail, in my opinion. Now, the basis for that being is that for a long time, open rates were a good indicator of how well your campaigns were performing. However, they are artificially inflated by things like Google's proxy email opening systems, or Apple's proxy email opening systems, which will open an email prior to a user receiving it. Will scan it for things like malware or spam, and then if it passes, it gets delivered to the end user. However, as an email service provider and as someone using an email tool, to us, that just looks like an open. So you'll see an open rate where a campaign might have an open rate of 45 to 50%. Now, if you said that to someone a decade ago, that is an incredibly good result. Nowadays, it's about average because it just artificially opened by the providers, and then that then gives you inflation of your results. I think the metric that is most slept on is, there's two I'm going to go in here with. First one is conversion rate. Conversion rate is the best indicator for the performance of your campaigns. How many users did you send to? How many users converted? That tells you what is resonating with customers more than any other metric, because at the end of the day, we're here to make sales. And the other one is returning customer rate. Now, I've already spoken about my love for getting customers to second and third and fourth order. And I think that returning customer rate is a really, really good indicator of how well your brand is perceived, how good your products are. And it gives you a really, really good indication as to how strong your position is in the market. Lots of brands can get people to come in and they can place one order. People aren't necessarily happy with the service. They aren't necessarily happy with the product. They may even return that product to you. And if your average order count is 1 or maybe it's 2, that is not an indicator that you've got a strong position in the market. But if you know that your average order count is 3, 4, 5, 6, that's a really good indication of how strong your performance is, and allows you to really sort of plan for the future around what new products really resonate with customers.
And in terms of that email open rate, how much of that email open rate, if it's 50% nowadays, would you ascribe to order opens that might not be real opens?
Well, Apple typically makes up 30%-ish of the market. Now, if you think that around half of those customers to sort of 3/4 potentially are using Apple's privacy tools, you might say that 15% of your total open rate is possibly just proxy opens. So if you're seeing 40% open rate, you might be confident to say that 25% of those are real customers and 15% be made up from proxy opens.
Right.
One thing I'll always advise retailers whenever we speak to them is that look at your click rates. So click rates aren't masked by proxies. They aren't masked by any sort of privacy statement. So if your click rate is sat around 1.5% to 2%, that's a very good indicator that your campaigns are resonating. If they're sitting below that threshold, that to us is an indicator that they're not. And then to almost take discount open rates as a metric at this point.
Okay, that's a very helpful metric, and I'll stop our team from getting as excited about our email campaigns as a result. So you've talked about ASOS as a glowing example of personalization, but if you could name a major retailer whose CRM strategy would collapse within the next 12 months, which would it be?
Trying to think on that one. I feel bad calling out retailers on this one, but my girlfriend really, really likes jewelry, and I buy from a brand called Monica Vinader. They do fantastic jewelry, really nice campaigns, but I get about 4 or 5 SMS campaigns from them a week. And this level of intrusion, especially on a channel like SMS, cannot be sustainable. Not only from a retailer standpoint, that the cost of SMS is significantly higher than email, so they're spending a lot of their own marketing campaign budgetary at that. As a customer and a consumer, it's very intrusive and it's very repetitive. And I'm going to be honest, I unsubscribe from it myself, despite the fact that I would continue to buy their products. And I just happen to think that if they're doing this with myself, it's going to be wider across their various other customers. And that level of oversending of campaigns just causes customer fatigue. And I think that they're not the only retailer guilty of doing it. There are many, many people out there. We see clients on our side who just send a campaign to everyone in their audience 3 or 4 times a week. And that sometimes works for them and sometimes don't. And I think that brands that go down this route and sort of gloss over setting up the core foundations of their automations, and they gloss over kind of targeting and segmenting their customers and just rely on that
Mm.
blasting to everyone, those are the customers that are going to the businesses that are going to really, really struggle moving forward as people get sick of their campaigns, essentially.
And you mentioned email and SMS
Yes.
on the scale of intrusiveness. How about WhatsApp is the next frontier?
So WhatsApp is a fantastic channel if you are clever with how you do it and you personalize and you segment and target. If you can, again, it falls back to what is the value add for the customer. If you are going to continuously send out blast campaigns via WhatsApp, WhatsApp on a general level is what people use as a very personal messaging channel. It's very rare to get marketing communications through it.
Mm.
If you're a retailer and you have data that you hold about a customer that says that they are very interested in a certain thing, perhaps their birthday is coming up, perhaps it's an anniversary of the time that they've joined your company, or they've got a key milestone, or they've got a loyalty scheme and they're near a certain point threshold. Things like
Yeah.
that really add value to the customer, and they're a
Mm.
great thing to push through to WhatsApp. But if you're going to continue to send customers information about discounts or general promotions or new products, that can get very fatigue heavy very quickly on a channel like WhatsApp.
Yeah. So high risk, high reward. Got a
Yes.
personalized user.
Yeah.
For brands that rely too heavily on discounting email, is that lazy conversion or is that necessary conditioning nowadays to get new
I
customers?
I am a firm believer less is more when it comes to discounting. I think there is a time and a place for it. And if it's done right, it can work well. Now, I think that whenever we speak to clients at Salesfire, we advise them to break down customers into different groups. There are certain groups of customers who will resonate typically very well with discounts, who are price savvy and price conscious. And they are the customers that, yes, you should probably focus on doing more discounting towards them. But there are some customers who are focused on a seamless experience and they prefer a personalized shopping experience with relevant products that are sent to them, relevant channels at relevant times, and they will convert without a discount. And if you were to discount them, you're likely just going to impact your margins anyway. So I think that discounts are great when used sparingly and used with proper segmentation and targeting. But I also think a lot of customers value a human, real experience with a brand that they resonate with, that they can connect with on a storytelling level, and they feel like they're dealing with someone who's similar to them. And that in itself is as much of a sales technique as any discounting can be.
What's the single retail vertical where you think email and CRM has the most unrealized potential at the moment?
I think so. I think for us, in terms of areas where it's not being used to its potential, and the areas that we always see the best areas is things like hobbies and interests, and that sector as a whole, where people have got an active interest in the product you're selling, is not using this as anywhere near it should be. So these are the sort of sectors and industries where you've got a high level of personal interest because a customer gets enjoyment out of using your product. Is a loss of really what we would call rich content that can be used within these sectors. So this is where, say, I used to work for a company called Crafters Companion, and their audience were crafters. So they were going out and they were making cards and things like that. And these are people who are hobbyists who are very interested in it and would spend lots and lots of money and lots of hours going into it. The best content they resonated with was never things like discounts. It was never things where they were trying to promote to them. It was help guides. It was guides to go on YouTube. It was how to do this. Here's inspiration. Here's ideas. Here's how to get the most out of your hobby. Here's a community that you can resonate with. And it was really just engaging with whatever was interesting them. And they didn't need discounting. They didn't need promotions. Open rates were 60%. Click rates were up to 30, 40% because you were actively engaging something they wanted to know more about. And you weren't necessarily doing a hard sell to them. So hobbyists, that sort of sector is where I see the most value from email and SMS.
Mm, very cool. Um, so look, AI content tools are now everywhere. Are you at Salesforce? Are you hiring more copywriters? Are you having less copywriters?
We've got a fantastic marketing team here at Salesforce who our tone of voice is very chilled. It's very casual. It's kind of professionals, but it's someone you could speak to on a face-to-face conversation. And
Mm.
we've found that when we try and replicate that through AI, AI as a general rule of thumb leans itself towards quite conversational responses.
Yeah.
but it also shows patterns. It's obvious when you've got an AI copying something. It's not just either the M dashes, it's the way it puts automatums and statuses and things like that. And we found that you can't replicate the tone of voice, the human side of things within AI. Where we're seeing the most usage out of it from copy and also from sort of strategy and inspiration standpoint is helping ideate things. If you can give it a couple of pointers or prompts, and it can help come back and give you ideas or suggestions on the best way to approach something, or it gives you a third party perspective on an idea you might have had and gives you a bit more context. And it's very, very good at bringing in lots of industry perceptions and values and
Mm.
articles that are online and allowing you to add more context to what you're saying. So that's where I don't ever see a situation where designers or copywriters or marketers will ever be replaced by AI. But I do see a situation where the quality of their work is enhanced because they're getting more exposure to industry standards and industry insights that they just wouldn't have time to do if they're manually looking for them.
Yeah. So the sort of AI plus human model would lead better and faster result.
Yeah, it's like having a mini R&D department for everything you want to write or produce. It's just giving you a little bit more context and information to help you back things up.
Okay. So the heart of it, you should need less copywriters.
Um, I'm not. I'm not going to annoy my marketing team by answering that one. I think that in reality, I think AI actually really allows you to have more copywriters. Now, the reason for this is because the time and effort required to get into producing the work is less, which means that you can produce more volume. By producing more volume, you ultimately have to have more campaigns and more things to build. So actually, in a way that by enhancing your team with AI, your output can increase. And that's when you almost bring in more staff, because it's almost like you've got supercharged staff now and they're not as held back by time restraints.
Okay. So loyalty programs used to be the beating heart of retention. Are
Yes.
they dead, or are they quietly being reborn within its CRM?
I think loyalty programs, when done right and promoted right, are a fantastic way to retain customers. But I think it depends on your brand and it depends on your positioning. I think there's as much value in what we've already discussed about seeing the shopping experiences as there is as just blanket discounting people. I
Mm.
think that if you have the right product and you have the right approach and people like your brand, the chances are a loyalty scheme is not going to make a difference. I think the best loyalty schemes that I have seen and ones that I benefit from, and it's a really, really fine line for brands to find, are the ones that actually offer true value. So if you're going to be a case of where you earn a point for every penny, but it's 5,000 points to get a pound off or whatever it is,
Yeah.
it's just not enough of an incentive to really sort of say, oh, I'm not going to go and shop around. I'm not going to go and look elsewhere because you're offering me the most value. Some of the best loyalty schemes that I've dealt with also offer things past the point of just having to give a purchase. So if you follow, I've seen schemes where if you follow them on social media, if you leave a review, if it's your birthday, they reward you for that. And that makes you feel like, okay, well, this is a two-sided thing. I don't need to spend loads of money with you to get a little bit back. This is a two-way transaction. So I think loyalty schemes work very, very well and they actually offer true value. And the trap that a lot of retailers fall into is spending a lot of time and infrastructure and like money building into a loyalty scheme, and then not using it enough to appeal to customers most, because they can be very time consuming to integrate. You've got to put strategies and plans and campaigns around them, and that's a lot of time for a business to put into something if they're not going to get much back from it. So it's a two-way transaction. I think you've got to give enough value back to the user to get enough value out of the scheme.
What's one ugly truth about digital transformation in retail that no one dares say aloud?
I think the ugly truth when it comes to digital transformation is if you're not speaking to every element of the business and you silo yourself, it's never going to succeed and you're just going to run into a brick wall. I think that when you look at, especially as the bigger companies get, the more they grow, the more they expand their teams. Teams don't talk to each other, or they can be very bad at not doing it. And that means that you run into the requirements for digital transformation don't match each team. Each team has their own unique individual asks. They don't necessarily communicate them. You run into a brick wall, you get pushback from one side of the business, or it doesn't meet the needs of another. And a general lack of communication, a lack of interoperability, a lack of shared data, a lack of shared insights is the biggest thing that will impact any business as it tries to grow.
It does. So it's a cultural barrier as well as just the technology itself.
Exactly that. I think that when I've worked brand side, and obviously I'm working in tech now, but when I've worked brand side and we've had dedicated teams for things like PPC and SEO and acquisition, we've had dedicated teams for CRM, you've got the creative team. And when those teams don't talk to each other, you're all working towards your own individual goals, but you're not backing it up with any data to prove why you're doing what you're doing. In reality, a PPC team who are acquiring customers, if those customers don't convert, it's a CRM team's job to make sure that they do. And if you're not talking about which customers you're acquiring with what campaigns and what messages, not only are you not going to convert those customers, it's a really disjointed experience.
Yeah.
Then if creative aren't being briefed by those two teams as to what content is resonating and what works well, that's a disjointed experience. And then you then work on creative that's not quite right and you're not converting customers because the messaging isn't quite right. And as you're trying to grow and scale and bring new tools into the mix or bring new products into the mix, then they're also not going to be quite right for the customer because then the product team isn't necessarily speaking to the team that's got the data, and it all becomes a bit disjointed and not ideal for the customer, who is the most important person at the end of the day. So I think that it will be the biggest blocker, is just people don't speak to each other enough, and teams need to work ways to share data and share insights.
If you forecast the next 3 years, what new metric or behavior will define retail email success?
I think, and it's always been a metric that has been important. I think with the rollout of privacy changes, we've had recent changes to Google, Yahoo's, and Outlook's spam,
Mm.
what they allow in and what they don't.
Yeah.
Deliverability is going to be the most important metric for retailers going forward, because a lot of time, a lot of money gets invested into setting up an email program. So you've got domains, you've got warm-up
Yeah.
programs, campaigns, templates, you've got the teams to build them. And if all that work goes into place and you get hit by Google's new stringent anti-spam policies and all that work goes down the drain because your emails aren't getting delivered, that's a huge investment from a company that's being wasted, that you then have to go and recomplete that and do that again. And the rules and restrictions are only getting tighter. The data you can see about customers is only getting less. So customers really need to get clever with how they measure deliverability, what they're looking at, how they build their campaigns, how they warm up their domains. All these different factors are more and more important, because getting back from square one and getting back to a safe sender level is getting harder and harder as time goes on.
What's one campaign you've set off that outperformed every expectation, and to the point where it almost felt risky?
Let's have a think. I'm going to go back to my favorite post-purchase flows. And we decided that in a previous employer that we decided to send out a very, very similar campaign as a transactional message. So the campaign itself was sent to all customers regardless of marketing permissions, because it was linked to the original purchase. And I wouldn't say it was risky, but it was definitely really high volume. We run into the risks of customers not resonating with it or really not being very happy with it, because it's coming past the realms of marketing. And it basically included information about how to use the product and how to get support if the customer wasn't happy or had any questions. So it was directly linked to the purchase. There was no marketing content, there was no promotions, there's no discounts. We were really unsure as to how well that would or wouldn't perform. And actually that campaign itself had a massive driver in the return rates of customers. And when we would QA and speak to customers and things, they say, well, it gave the impression that you cared because you actively thought of the questions that I was going to have and you addressed them before I ever had to, which showed that you understood your customer and you were happy and that you're a good seller. And then they return off the back of that. So something very, very simple had a massive impact that didn't require discounting. It was all again about like that experience the user had with us. But the real risk was with that one is that if customers hasn't resonated or anything like that, there was such huge volume behind it. A couple of spam markers would have just absolutely done some damage to our sending reputation. So I think that was not super risky, but that was certainly a risk that we took with that one.
Okay, glad it paid off. Ethan, I'm going to ask you the questions we asked to all our guests.
Yes. Well, I've covered some of the questions I've been through, so I'll
yeah,
try and talk through.
yeah, no worries at all. So, look, I mean, you've chosen to have your career first in brands themselves, and then in retail marketing. But what detail of retail makes you, what do you like the most?
The detail I like most about retail is the psychology behind why people buy and the things you can do to leverage that. So tiny optimizations of campaigns and websites and messaging can make huge differences to how people perceive your brand and therefore how they engage with it. So an example of how this has worked is that we had a client who came on board and they asked us for a general review of their marketing content, their website and things like that. And when you looked at their website, it looked like something straight out of the early 2000s. It was very bright, lots of promotions, discounts, bright colors, red CTAs, which is generally usually a no-go. And my initial first thought, and where I was wrong, was let's create something sleek, minimal, crisp, modern, make a little bit luxury, kind of really appeal to a higher end market. But when we did some digging into the customer base and we did some brand research and looked into it, that in itself wasn't going to resonate with those customers because the illusion of cheap and cheerful, the illusion of good discounts and good value for money was what these customers were interested in. They weren't interested in a brand that was perceived as a higher end product or perceived as luxury because to them that would have took it out their price point, even if the product was the same. And when people interact with a brand or they interact with their website, it takes milliseconds for them to take their mind up as to what they actually think of that company.
Yeah.
So these really subtle, small nuances, whether it's an entire website styling or whether it's the coloring or the rounding of a CTA or the fonts used, people will make up subtle decisions psychologically within seconds as to what they perceive that to be. And it can be little things like what color a CTA is will determine whether you engage with it. Previously, I've ran tests on pink, blue, green, and red CTAs, and the pink CTA had a 25% higher click rate than the rest of them
Yeah.
because people had an association with the brand colors, had an association that whatever it was that drove them to do that, they associated well with the color pink. Red performed by far the worst because I think people associate a red button with stopping something or something negative. So it's all these micro changes that can be done that affect the buyer psychology of how someone then engages with your product.
And what retail or detail would you most like to change?
I think I would change. I think it goes back to what I was saying about the siloing of teams. I think as businesses, especially in the e-commerce space, grow and they expand their teams and they expand their function, a lot of companies fall into the trap of growing and not talking to each other. And that puts you in a situation where you've got teams that are disjointed and you've got different teams working towards different objectives. And as I've said, data is by far the most important thing to a business. You had a recent guest on called Oliver who said some amazing things about his 5 pillars and one of them being data. And I firmly stand behind that. The data is the single most important thing to a business. And if teams aren't sharing that data and they aren't processing it in the correct way and they aren't using that as a unified front
Yeah.
and people interpret it their own way and they silo themselves down, it massively hampers the growth of a business. And when you've got creative teams that don't talk to PPC teams, which don't talk to product teams, which aren't talking to the commercial teams, and no one's really discussing things, everyone just ends up almost pushing at things from different sides and it doesn't work. So if there's a change, I'd make retailers get better at that communication and get better at that talking, having been in businesses where that doesn't necessarily happen and you end up really disjointed and not working towards the same common goal.
And do you have any mechanisms or communication tools you've seen that really help break down those silos?
I think for me, I think it is it's almost on a human level. You've got to find someone in the business who really likes data. And there are people out there who look at data and say, nah, I'm not going to touch that. And there are some people that go in there and love it. I'm on the love it kind of bandpoint. And you've just got to find an advocate in the business who's passionate enough about that data to make sure that everyone is then understanding the data, everyone is able to interpret it in their own way and is responsible for speaking across the business. So find the strange data person in your business and get them in every team possible.
Nice. Nice. And sorry, Ethan's reference earlier was to Oliver Spark, our season 1 guest. What's your most controversial prediction for the future of retail?
I think the most controversial prediction is that a lot of people have harked on about how AI is going to have the biggest difference to retailers going forward. And I think it's going to make a difference, but I don't think it's going to be the biggest. And I think the biggest difference is the ability for smaller retailers to punch well above their weight with new mechanisms on the market in ways they never have been able to before. So the first thing for this is the rise of social shopping. So if you look at TikTok's got I think it's about 1.2 billion active users currently. And on TikTok, you have the ability to run TikTok shops, you have the ability to run live streams, you have the ability to promote and sell products to customers. And this is something that's never really existed before. So suddenly you've got real humans sat like me and you right now selling products to other humans who are very relevant to them. It's a very easy way to buy things. You can click into it as part of the engagement. You can click into it while still watching. It doesn't require a huge process of going through and researching and going through a complicated checkout process. So it's a very, very easy way to get access to products that are relevant to you, sold by someone you can resonate with. And when I used to work at Crafters Companion, I used to work for Sarah Davies, who was on Dragon's Den, and we used to sell a huge amount of the product was done through traditional TV shopping channels, so things like QVC, Hochanda. When COVID hit, it wasn't acceptable to fly out to Florida to go and stand in a TV studio for a week. So as a business, we decided to explore other channels, and they settled on Facebook Live as the preferred streaming service. And this was probably one of the greatest decisions that company ever made, because not only did you have a very, very low cost option to sell on, because you didn't have the infrastructure cost of a studio, didn't have the infrastructure cost of traveling. You also had a huge group of really engaged users who felt that they were engaging with the star and the person they were interested on a one-on-one level, because you had people active in the comments, asking questions that were getting answered live on stream. And people felt like they were really part of that experience, and they felt like they were really engaged. And this didn't require the funds and the infrastructure to get onto terrestrial TV, and it didn't require a lot backwards and forwards for that. It was just someone on social media sets up a live stream, starts talking to their customers and sells. And I think this as a channel is massively growing, especially across the TikTok side of things. And it gives small independent retailers a chance to really get huge levels of volume that you just wouldn't have had beforehand. And I think the second thing that helps these smaller retailers get visibility and growth is actually the rise of marketplaces. When you look at like the B&Q, Next, Boots, Amazon's obviously the big player in that space. You've got wealths of independent retailers who would struggle to get the web presence and to get the brand presence and to get the SEO ranking. And they'd be putting loads and loads of money behind Google shopping ads and things like that. Can now actually look at the bigger brands like B&Q and use their brand reputation and their brand trust to promote their products. That if someone comes on and they see gazebo. I bought a gazebo the other day, but I bought it through a party seller on B&Q. I probably gone and bought that from their site directly because it was a very high ticket item. But because I had the ability and the trust of the parent brand who owned that marketplace, I bought from an independent retailer who probably never would have got a second look because they wouldn't even have shown in my search rankings.
Right.
So these two things combined, I think, really, really give small retailers a massive step up in the world and give them a real actual opportunity to take on the big retailers and take a little bit of the market share for themselves.
Makes total sense. And from your retail career thus far, what's the craziest story?
I think, and this might sound like some shameless self-promotion for SalesFire, I promise it's not, but this is quite a recent one for us, is that we spoke about anonymous users and the ability to identify users who traditionally would have been missed. Now, we've for years kept that technology siloed within our own platforms. So we've used it to power our emails, our search, our recommendations, and we've seen very, very good results from that. But we never really put it up against another email marketing platform or another web platform. And we decided after a few late nights that we wanted to try and plug this into a platform and see how well it performed. So we built an integration into Klaviyo. Now, within 24 hours on our first test retailer, we managed to identify 10,000 missed events for that retailer. And at the current count, we've just gone over 31 million missed events across the retailers who are using our tool. Now, this is the reason that I find this so crazy, and the thing that drives the most excitement for this is that every single retailer we speak to is missing data. They're missing sales, and they're missing customer engagement. They're missing chances to engage with their customers. And this is, think how many thousands, if not tens of thousands of retailers in the UK already, or if not hundreds of thousands. You multiply that globally, you multiply that by the missed events. There's such a huge wealth of data that's just getting missed. And when you really think the scale of it, there is so much that retailers are actually missing out on that they could be to get sales. And I think that when we look at the changes to cookies and the changes to how much data we can or cannot access, and everyone sees it as a negative, I think a lot of retailers should see it as a chance and a positive to actually improve how they collect data and improve how they see data, and use it as a chance to actually try and gather more sales and be a bit better with how they do that.
Okay, awesome. So 31 million opportunities that those retailers are going to capture in the future? Potential.
Exactly. Yeah, hopefully more.
Ethan Burnett, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. That's it for today's episode of Retail is Detail. This episode was brought to you by Loxa, the Klarna for insurance, protecting every retail customer everywhere. We support retailers in offering product protection on all major platforms, online and in-store, on all insurable categories. Visit locksarcovered.com to find out more. You can catch previous episodes on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, or at retailersdetailpodcast.com. I've been your host, Jamie Hamer. Thanks for listening, and see you next Monday.